Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Yasser Ahmed. So in this set of videos, we're going to be looking at chapters from the ICT IGCSE course. We're going to be looking at paper 1 chapters from starting from chapter 1 to chapter 10. And in this video, we're going to be looking at types and components of computer systems. So we're going to split these videos into different sections. So in this video, we'll focus on 1.1. The next video will be 1.2 and so on. So let's start with hardware 1.1. So what is hardware? So you can see this is the inside of a computer, a desktop computer, and it's made up of many components. So hardware is physical components that make up the computer system. And each piece of hardware, so we've got the hard drive here, the video card, the CPU, will have a specific role in a computer system. So think about your body, your organs will have a specific role. And hardware can be either internal, so fixed inside of the computer, or external. So let's look at some examples of hardware that you may find inside of a computer system. So the first one is the CPU, the central processing unit. And this is the brain of the computer. It's the device that will carry out all of the calculations to complete software instructions. The next device or component which we're going to be looking at is the motherboard. And if I zoom in, you can see the motherboard is the main board that connects all of the devices together. So in this picture here, this is the motherboard here, and everything is connected to the motherboard. So you've got your memory, you've got your CPU, you may have built-in graphics card and video cards onto the motherboard, or you may have these ones that you may have to plug in. The hard drives, optical drives will also have to be plugged into the motherboard. So the motherboard is a circuit board which connects the main components of the computer system. You also have the memory. So we have two types of memory, and we will be looking at RAM and ROM in a little bit more detail later on. So RAM is random access memory, and this holds temporary instructions which have been processed by the CPU. And you also have read-only memory, which contains the boot-up instructions when you start the computer system. So any data instructions that are to be processed by the CPU must be placed into the main memory. Okay, so you got the two different types here. Now, to display graphics on your computer, you need a graphics video card. Now, this may be a separate device or may be built into your motherboard. So a graphics card is a device that attaches itself to the motherboard to enable the computer to process and display graphics. And a sound card is very similar, but obviously it's going to be inputted into the motherboard to process and output sound. So again, this can be built into the motherboard. It may be or maybe a separate device. Now you have your secondary storage. So you may have an internal hard disk drive. So this is a device where you will install your operating system to. You'll store your files like videos and pictures and documents to. And the capacity of the hard drive can range from gigabytes to terabytes. Okay, so this will be a storage device used with your computer. Even when you turn off the computer and turn it back on, the files that have been saved onto this hard drive will be saved and will be available. Now, to connect to the network, you also need a network card. Again, this device may be built into the motherboard or may be a little bit separate. So a network card provides the computer with a network connection, either through a wireless connection or through a physical connection via a cable. Now, most desktop computers will have an optical disk drive, and this will allow you to input a CD, a DVD, a Blu-ray into your computer system. Okay. Also, the optical disk drive will allow you to copy files onto a CD or DVD or Blu-ray, and this process is known as burning data onto disks. Just before we move on, optical disk drives, why would we use this? You may be installing softwares, you might be installing device drivers for your printers or your scanners. You may be playing games, so you may need to put a disk into the optical disk drive. So the power supply obviously connects to every device in your computer system, and it provides power. So that if you go back to the main picture here, you can see the power supplies here, and it has cables which connects to all of these devices. So the hard drive, optical drive, it may connect to the motherboard as well to power up each device. Okay, so we also need to look at different types of hardware devices. So you may have input devices, output devices, and external storage devices. So input devices are devices that will essentially input data into a computer system. So we have some examples here: a mouse, a keyboard, a microphone. We've got a barcode scanner here. So this will basically scan the data from the barcode and input those details into the computer system. If we didn't have a barcode scanner, then we'd have to type the number in using a keyboard or a number pad. So input devices are used to input data into a computer system, and output devices are used to output data from a computer system. So the examples you have here are monitors, speakers, printers, projectors. So any device that's outputting data from a computer. So we looked at the internal hard drive, which is a secondary storage device. Okay, and this device is used to store our files or applications, applications, as well as normal applications. But we can also have external storage devices, and this will provide external storage or backup solutions. So the obvious external device that we may be more familiar with is a USB stick or USB drive. You may also be using an external hard drive to back up your files to. Maybe you want to burn some data onto an optical disc or use an SD card. And these are typical exam questions. So circle two items which are internal hardware. So you got a processor, known as a CPU, and a sound card. Monitor, printer would be output devices. Mouse would be the input device. Actuator is also an output device. And define the term hardware, so physical components of a computer system. So we looked at the physical components of the computer system. Now what we're going to be doing is looking at software. So what is software? And software can be separated into two categories. So we have application software and system software. So think about your mobile phones, your social media apps, your Facebook, Instagram. These are known as apps. But to run these apps, you need an operating system, and that's known as system software. So, what is software? Let me just go through this definition here. So, software are programs for controlling the operation of the computer or processing electronic data. Software is not a physical thing. It cannot be stored. It can be stored on a physical medium such as a CD-ROM, but it's basically a collection of instructions telling a computer what to do. So, for a computer system to be useful, it must consist of both hardware and software. So we have some examples of software here. So the Office 365 suite, which includes your Word, processor, spreadsheets, and so on. You've got antivirus software, which is system software, which basically manages your computer system, maintains it, and makes sure it's running efficiently. You have your operating system, so you've got a Mac and a Windows, which will essentially provide you with the interface with your computer system and manage your files and security. But we'll have a look at this in a little bit more detail in a moment. So let's have a look at application software. So application software examples: word processor, spreadsheet, databases. You can say things like graphic editing, movie editing. Make sure when you are referring to application software, do not talk about the brands. So don't say Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. Always talk about the type. So you would say word processing software, spreadsheet software, and then you can always give an example like Microsoft Word or so on. So these types of application softwares always have a specific task. Okay, so if you want to write a letter, you'd use a word processing document, and it'll send Microsoft Word. So if you write a letter, you'd use a Word document, a word processing application. If you wanted to browse the internet, you use a browser. So an example would be Chrome. If you wanted to manipulate data in a spreadsheet or database, you use spreadsheet or database software, and then you can give examples if you like. So you can have lots of different types of application software, and you also need system software which provides the computer the services to operate. So the most obvious example that we can think about is the operating system. So without the operating system, When you turn the computer on, you'll just see a blank screen. You won't see anything loading up. So we need the operating system. And the operating system is involved in running a computer system to provide with a user interface. It allows your device drivers to work. So device drivers which allow hardware components to work. So it could be your printer, it could be a scanner. And also under system software, you have a utility software. So this could be antivirus to maintain the security of your computer system. You could have utility software to maintain the performance of your computer system. So system software essentially provides you with the operating system, provides you with the security, and makes sure everything is running and functioning. The application software is used if you want to do a specific task. So let's say, for example, I want to edit a graphic. In the exam, I would say I'm using a graphic editing software to edit a graphic, and then you can give an example like Photoshop. Okay, so here are a few more examples of software, application software, essentially. So we have word processing, spreadsheets. So you can say I can use spreadsheets to make graphs, to carry out calculations, databases to store data, to run queries and reports to find specific types, specific data within a database. Photo editing, so to edit our image files. Audio editing as well, so to edit and trim audio clips. We have video editing. We also have apps on our phone. You have computer aided design, so to create designs in either 2D or 3D, and this is used by architects. And you also have something called applets. So this is a small computer program that performs a specific task within a larger program. So in a browser, you may have a web-based applets, which may run a particular type of movie platform, so QuickTime movies or Windows Media Player. So will allow embedded files to be played within a browser, for example. And a typical exam question, a small application performing one or two simple functions is called an applet. And here we have some more exam style questions. So Martin will need to use software to create different types of content before including them in the presentation. Name two types of software he might use for each one. Write down what he would use it for. So tip, do not write the brand name. Don't say Microsoft Word. Word processor is the correct answer. So Martin will use software to create different types of content. So he needs to create content before he includes them into his presentation software. So we can say word processor to type up text for the presentation. And maybe he wants to include a graph. So he can use spreadsheet software. And the use would be to create a graph. And if he wants to include pictures, you can use a graphic editing application. And then here's another typical exam style question. So producing menus for the restaurant. And this would also be a process of elimination. We're going to be looking at control and measurement soon. So producing menus for the restaurant, what's going to be in the menus? Probably text and pictures. So the most obvious choice will be word processing. Calculating the cost of the meals. Since we're going to be using formulas, functions within spreadsheets, this one makes sense. Now, control and measurement, we use that in greenhouse as an example to maintain conditions to grow our plants. So automatically turning on fans when the room gets hot, that will be the control part of the measure and control system. And monitoring the temperature in the restaurant will be a measurement. So we use sensors to take the readings. Okay, so let's have a look at more into sensors. So real world measurements are collected as an analog signal from the sensor. So like a temperature sensor, for example, or light sensor. A computer only understands digital signals. So for the computer to understand the readings from the sensors, what needs to happen is an analog to digital converter is required to convert the analog signal from the sensors into a digital signal. So here's a little diagram. So these are the analog signals collected from the sensors. For it to be understood by the computer system, it needs to be converted using an analog to digital converter. Analog signals can now be understood by computers once it's been converted into digital. So you have some information here about analog and digital. So analog is a continuous range of values. Records record sound waves as they are, only used in analog devices, and digital data is discontinuous values and is converted into binary waveform, so suited for digital electronics like computers, mobile, and any other electrical device. Okay, so let's have a look at measurement and control software. So what we have here is a greenhouse, and what we want to do in a greenhouse is to maintain conditions so we can grow our plants. Okay, what we don't want is the temperature to get too hot or too cold. If that is the case, then the plants may not grow. So measurement and control software responsible for changing physical conditions in an environment. So the measuring part is where the sensors will take readings that are processed by the computer or the microprocessor. And the control element is we have to compare the sensor readings to a preset level, and this is normally done by the microprocessor. And the control software will then decide an output. For example, if the temperature's dropped, we may need to increase or turn on the heater to increase the temperature in the greenhouse. And then the whole process is repeated, and we continue to monitor the temperature readings. And if it gets too hot, maybe we need to turn off the heater and turn on the fan. So the whole point of this is we're maintaining a condition to grow our plants at a certain temperature. And here's some typical exam questions. Sensors are placed in a river to check the water level. If the water level in the river rises more than 5 meters above normal river levels, a flood barrier is raised to safeguard the village. The flood barrier remains raised until the water levels drops to normal levels. Now, explain why the data from the sensors cannot be directly read by the computer and name the device that needs to be used so that the computer can read this data. Now, if you are looking at these sorts of questions, I would always read a question twice, underline or highlight key parts of the question, and once you've given yourself a bit of time to think, then you can answer the questions. So why can't computers read data from sensors? Because data from sensors is in an analog form. Computers only read in digital data. The analog needs to be converted into a digital data using a converter. And a few more exam questions here. Explain the difference between measurement systems and control systems. So measurement systems take the readings and stores the result. It can detect changes in the environment. And control changes the environment, and values taken from the sensors are compared to a preset. Action is then taken depending on comparison to a preset. So as we talked about before, if we're in a greenhouse and if the temperature has gone below a certain value, so let's say 21 degrees, then a microprocessor needs to react. There has to be an output. And to increase the temperature, the microprocessor will send a signal to the actuator, in this case, it might be a heater, to turn on to increase the temperature so we can get back to 21. And then the sensors will keep on monitoring the situation to maintain those conditions. If it gets too hot, maybe then we have to turn off the heater and turn on the fans or open up the windows. Okay, and a couple of more exam questions. So a student is carrying a scientific experiment to measure the temperature of liquid as it cools down. The student uses a sensor connected to a computer to read the temperature. Give 3 advantages of using computers and sensors rather than the students taking temperature readings herself. So why is it better to use a computer system rather than the student to take the readings themselves? So if the computer is taking the readings, measurements can be taken outside of school hours. The computer reads the data more accurately. The computer will not forget to take a reading. And if you're thinking about something else, measurements can be taken continually at a consistent time interval. Okay, so you'll get more accurate and consistent readings. And identify 2 devices which are used in control systems. So obviously you need a computer, you need sensors, you need an analog to digital converter. The actuator would be the output device. It might be lights, it might be heater, it might be a motor, it might be a pump. So we'll have a look at these devices a little bit more in the next chapter. So now let's look at some system software. So you have operating systems, which manage the computer functions, including hardware devices, the input and output. Also provides the user with a graphical user interface, and we'll go more into that in the next video. Utility software, so these could be antivirus, could be performance related to to maintain computer resources by running specific tasks. So when you buy a new printer, for example, you may need to install device drivers to ensure the printer is working. So it allows hardware devices to run on a computer, including printers and graphics cards and network cards. And then you have also linkers and compilers, and these are linked to programming. So if you're writing a program, this linker will produce an executable file. So when you click on it, it will run the program. And a compiler is when you're checking for errors in the program, it will. What I'm saying. It will basically translate a program written in a specific language which can be understood by the computer system. So these two are linked to programming. If you're doing computer science as well, you'll probably be looking at these two in a little bit more detail. So write down two examples of system software. So the go-to application would be operating systems, utilities, and then you can give an example, maybe like antivirus, and device drivers to ensure your hardware devices can run on the computer system. Okay, join me in the next video. We're going to be looking at the main components of the computer system. So that will be the next video, 1.2. I hope this all makes sense. So we just looked at hardware components, which are physical components of the computer system. We looked at some examples. We looked at input, output devices. We looked at two different types of software, so system and application software. We looked at measuring and control software as well. So guys, please join me in the next video, and hopefully this all makes sense. Drop your comments below. Please share, please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.